Hey, everyone, welcome to this next episode of the Founders Live Conversations, part of the Founders Live Academy. I am Nick Hughes, founder and CEO of Founders Live. And today we're so excited to have Dr. Julie Pham, and she's actually a friend of mine that we go quite a far back, and I'm excited to talk a little bit about the early days there, but really excited to have Julie here. We're going to talk about a lot of things around, her journey, her company, CuriosityBased, as well as, her new book, and really this entire framework around the 7 forms of respect, which is very, very interesting. And as we go through this process, you're in this room, feel free to ask questions, right? And we have a chat box here that feel free to type in there, even share your LinkedIn or whatnot. But if you have a question, we can type in there, and we'll just address questions as we go. This is going to be casual and a conversation. So if things pop up, we definitely want to bring you into the conversation as well. But with that, I want to introduce Julie and bring her in and say hi.
Hi, thank you so much, Nick, for inviting me. I'm a big fan of Founders Live. I remember when we had those live events in the WeWork in the basement area. So it's now you're hosting, doing some, as we all do, we reinvent ourselves in the pandemic. So yeah.
It goes, for you saying a downstairs in a WeWork back in the day, it means you were very much an early a member and attendee. And so let's hear a little bit about your background before we get into really this conversation. Just a bit of background on yourself.
Yeah. So a really important part of my identity is that I am a Vietnamese refugee. I was born in Vietnam. I came here as a 2-month-old baby with my parents. We left as boat people. And because my father was in re-education camp for 3 years after the war ended, and came to Seattle, and my parents founded a Vietnamese language newspaper. It was the first privately owned newspaper. It's still running, and that was in 1986. And that's important because I think of Vietnamese community as very resilient, resourceful, and entrepreneurial, and a community of hustlers. And so that's the community that they serve. And the reason why they started that newspaper was because they saw, well, the community is growing and there needs to be a newspaper to connect all these businesses. And so there was that layer of my parents being entrepreneurs and then my parents serving entrepreneurs. And so that was very much an important and part of my life growing up with the newspaper. And then I went off and I actually got a PhD in history. And so, and I thought I was going to be an academic, and I spent most of my 20s studying history. And then towards the end, I realized that I actually didn't want to stay in academia, and I wanted to pursue business because I felt it was much more dynamic. And I knew I didn't want to go back to school because I spent most of my 20s in school already. So what I did was decide to get my real life MBA. And I did that by coming back to Seattle in 2008 and running my family's newspaper. And so remember, 2008, this is the recession, and this is also the start of the decline of the newspaper industry. Yeah. So this is a really, really difficult time. And this is when I started business. And I learned so much during that time. I learned how to be really scrappy and how to create partnerships and how to make something out of really nothing. And so I was at the newspaper for 3 years. My brother and I actually ended up buying half the newspaper from our parents. We took out a community development loan, put my brother's car as collateral, and we had all these partnerships. And we actually partnered with a Hispanic distributor who took us to Eastern Washington. We were their first Asian newspaper. And we did I Googled how to write a business plan. I didn't know how to do this. And I did a lot of volunteering. And so that I could learn how to interact and how to be more strategic. I learned how to sell.
Yeah.
I remember talking to an ad agency, and they were asking me all these questions I just didn't know how to answer. And when I got off the phone, I was just, I'm really bad at this right now, but I'm going to be good. And that's what happened. It's just like the sales is like constantly hearing no. So in any case, I was there for 3 years. I learned a lot. And then eventually we actually had to shut down the edition my brother and I owned, because sometimes you have to amputate a limb to save the body. And that's what we realized we needed to do. And then by then, I actually started working at a tech company, and then another tech company. And then then I went over to Washington Technology Industry Association, which is where Nick and I met. And so I was there for 6 years. It was the best job I ever had. It's the best job I ever had. And so the only reason why I would ever leave the best job I ever had was to start my own company, because it was truly an incredible place to work. And while I was there, I started doing a lot of work around, I built a cross-sector collaboration fellowship. And even though I had done, at that point, it was over a decade of community building work, seeing these, bringing together people from tech, government, and community-based organizations in this intense period, it helped me realize that what makes people, the key to resilience and resourcefulness and open-mindedness is curiosity.
Yeah. Well, and I want to slide in right here and point out, this is a really cool segment that you were building curriculum, if you will, in WTIA, the Washington Technology Industry Association. And you basically realized, no, this is something more, and I'm going to go create my own company around it. And we share a similar history in the sense that, you know, I had this thing called Feature Friday, and it was happening in Seattle, and it was basically, you know, the monthly events and all that. And, you know, realizing that you have something, obviously that was kind of in my own thing, but it was like something that transitioned into a much different direction, bigger thing. And so the transition was amazing, where there's a moment where you look in the mirror and you say, no, I'm going to do this, you know, and I'm committing to myself and the vision that I see. And, you know, you felt it was much more important to do that, you know, outside of another entity, creating your own entity and going on your path as an entrepreneur. So talk a little bit about that there's a point where you make that decision.
Yeah, because I realized, wow, this work can serve more than just the tech industry. That curiosity is, because actually I want to foster curiosity in the world. I'm just starting in the workplace because that's where we spend most of our waking hours. So, and so it's just seeing like, wow, this can have a lot of relevance. And I really wanted to spend more time writing, because I mean, I think probably this is the researcher in me, and writing and creating content. And so there was another motivation was, I did a lot of work around talking about increasing diversity in tech and increasing diversity in leadership. And yet so much of that conversation was focused on representation. And what I mean by that is, it's just like, okay, let's get more women, let's get more people of color in leadership roles. And the analogy I like to use is, and while this is happening, most leadership and management books are still written by white men. And so it's like, the analogy I like to use is, we can change the actors, but the scripts are the same. So we also need to expand that pool of screenwriters, that pool of playwrights. And I love books by white men. I love Adam Grant. I love Patrick Lencioni, and there's space for more. And so that's one of the other reasons why I wanted to start my company as well, so that I could advocate for that, and so that I could also contribute to that too, and to celebrate more leadership authors, and even expand how we think about leadership.
Yeah, love it. And, you know, such an interesting, you know, all companies have just an interesting, you know, kind of creation story, which I think that's great. Let's shift into, just because I think it's going to be a great deep dive into the conversation around, you know, the 7 forms of respect. First of all, you know, where does that name come from, and what, you know, what are they? And let's talk a little bit more about that, which I think is really, really intriguing.
So, so in my community building work, well, actually, I'll say there are 3 aspects that really inform this. One is just my lived experience. The other is my community building work. And then there's also there's research. And so growing up bicultural, Vietnamese and American, having lived in the UK, Germany, France, and Vietnam, I realized that people have different expectations of how we want to be treated. And then in the community building work, here I am in the US, bringing together people from really different backgrounds, and they would also have different ideas of how they want to be treated. And that there was the friction that would emerge, because it's like, you're not treating me the way, like, I don't like that. And it's like, oh, well, but I like that. Think about when people talk about respect, they often invoke the golden rule: treat people the way that you want to be treated. Well, I'm treating you the way that I want to be treated. Well, that's not the way they want to be treated. And then there was also just focus groups and interviews and questionnaires and workshops, and ended up working with over 400 people over a couple of years. So, so the first question I asked is, how do you want to be treated? And then people kept using the word respect. So that's where the respect came in, right? And so, and I'm a huge fan of 5 love languages. And the 5 love languages, people have the 5 languages of appreciation in the workplace. And it's just like, that's great. And I think that appreciation and respect are different. And so the way that people talk about it, and the way people would just talk about these, the things that happen at work that were, they're the big toxic things. And then there's just like the small things that would grate at people. And so over time, it evolved into 7 different forms. And it was listening to people, like, is this it? No, we changed it. We changed it. It started with 6, and then like we changed the 6. And so that's how it evolved. That's where it got the name, the respect, and the forms of respect, that there are different forms of respect. And I dream that one day people will ask each other, hey, these are my forms of respect. What are your forms of respect? Because with the 7 forms of respect, it's not about being respectful in all 7 forms. It's actually about understanding which ones do I care about and which are the ones I don't care about.
Yeah. Well, and side note, everyone, again, we have the chat box, and feel free to craft some ideas, thoughts, questions, and we'll address them, and we'll bring you in. You just mentioned something really, really interesting, which, and we talked earlier, like, I'm set for a trip to go to the other side of the world. We'll visit your home country, and Indonesia, and really just Southeast Asia, and whatever corner of the world you look at, cultural is different, and quite frankly, respect could be viewed as different. So how does, especially when people are all global now, teams operate globally at times, how do we approach the concept of respect when it's subjective, and we want to be respectful of people no matter what culture, but yet we might, as a certain society from like one side of the world, not fully understand what is respect on another side of the world. So how do you break that down?
I think it's first acknowledging we are going to unintentionally disrespect people. That's going to happen. Miscommunications are going to happen. It's unavoidable. So first, just like, okay, this will happen. And then it's like, how do I move from there? It's actually not about preventing it. It's actually about recovering from it. And moving through it. Because if you try to prevent it, there are things that we can learn and try to avoid. And yet also everyone is different too. So for example, you could have someone who's just like in Vietnam, punctuality is not that important. There's a phrase that time is rubber. And yet that doesn't mean that no Vietnamese care about time. So you still have to individually understand, like, hey, what does this person care about? And to understand that we belong to multiple cultures simultaneously. And we're constantly having to navigate that. And as I'm navigating it, other people are navigating it too. And we're all kind of navigating it in our own ways. And so part of it is just giving ourselves grace that, hey, things are going to happen that I didn't mean. And now how do I have a conversation about it and move through it so that we can get to a place of greater understanding, and also that it is a negotiation and compromise, because just because I want something doesn't necessarily mean I'll get it, because I have to look at the context and the situation. And what I mean by that is maybe that's not what the work allows for. Maybe that's not like the So I'll give you an example. In an emergency room setting, punctuality is not going to be important. It's about who comes first.
Yeah.
I don't know. No, it's about who needs more care, not about who comes first or who comes on time. If someone has a gunshot wound, they're definitely going to get more care than someone who's got a tummy ache, right? Like that's what it is. And so, yes, it's just about understanding that respect is dynamic. And so you asked me, what are the 7 forms? So I'll share them. And then also I want to share the 3 dimensions of the 7 forms of respect. So we use this acronym called PICCA, PPICCAA, and it stands for procedure, punctuality, information, candor, consideration, acknowledgement, and attention. So those are the different forms. And people can say like, I like it. It's important to me. It super matters to me. Or it's like, it doesn't matter to me so much. And then the 3 dimensions are hierarchy. So the way we show respect and expect respect actually depends on power dynamics. It can influence how we think about it. And then there's the second one is direction. It's what I call give versus get. So the way I want to give respect can differ from the way I want to get respect. Right. So example is, think about, maybe I like to surprise people, but I don't like to be surprised. Or maybe you think about that person who gives you unsolicited constructive feedback, and yet when you give them unsolicited constructive feedback, they don't like it.
Yeah.
Right. And then the third dimension is what we call what matters to you. And this is getting people to really think deeply about, what do I actually care about versus what I think I should care about? What matters to me so much that I will actually feel bad if I don't get it. And that takes actually a lot of self-awareness and vulnerability to admit. So for example, for me, acknowledgement is important to me. And yet it can be kind of cringy to go like, I want you to thank me and to praise me. So, to say that out loud and it actually does matter to me. To say that can be hard. And so that's what the 3rd dimension shows. And in any case, this just shows that respect is dynamic.
Yeah. So interesting. Of the 7, let's actually really look at 2, if not 3, but maybe name 2 that you want to dive a little deeper on, and maybe they're more closer to your heart or meaningful, or I don't know.
I'll share some that I think are just controversial. How about that? Where you say because controversial in the American workplace. So attention is one. So attention is about listening deeply, eye contact, not interrupting. And that's relative.
Yeah.
Because when working in tech, multitasking is totally normal. It is acceptable. In fact, at some companies, it's seen as a sign of performance. And so if you are at a company or you're in an organization that where people just normally multitask, and then you go into that workplace and you're like, I'm constantly being disrespected. It's like, no, that's actually a norm there. It's just like, it's not considered disrespectful. So I think that illustrates how it can be, how attention is as a form of respect is relative. And this is the one where I actually see the most generational divides too.
And I want to, double click on that for a sec, because, and with all these, everyone, this is, this book, which I haven't read yet, and I'm excited to read it. But just all these, the 7 forms, as you go through them, they're going to spark something within you. Right. And you're going to be like, what is that? And, I think what you just pointed out, for me, that's a big one. Because I'm a communicator. I look people in the eye. I am I don't know what the opposite is of multitasker, but I realize that I'm very focused, and hey, if other people are very multitasking, I guess that's their way. But if I'm in a meeting and someone's on a phone, to me, that's that is disrespectful. And, or they're typing something, and, especially face to face, right? If we're on a Zoom meeting, it's kind of inherent that I'm going to be taking notes, but if we're sitting at a table in person, having a meeting, and someone's only down here, they might even be taking notes to add value to the meeting, but it feels like a bit of disrespect in my view, the way that so I'm like, oh yeah, attention is actually an important one for me, I guess. And, so it's just really, really interesting the way that, I love that you've written this, you've really put these out there, because in the end, this is again, a mirror. And the last thing I'll say, and then I want to hear the second one, is if there is do you agree with this, that if there is like a visceral response, there's something there within you, like when you're like, oh, I'm feeling some either instant like rise of blood pressure or stress, you're like, I need to dig into that a little bit, because that's something that it's sparking something in me. Do you agree with that?
Yes. And that is that when we ask people the question of what matters to you, I tell people to listen to what their body is saying. Because here's the thing, you may not say you need it. You may not say it's important to you, because that's where it could be a power play too. So like power dynamic. So for example, maybe you would say if someone's working for you and you're like, hey, put away your phone, but you go talk to a funder and they're on their phone. Are you going to say, hey, could you put away your phone?
Right.
It's no. Chances are you're not, right? And yet, in both circumstances, like, and you might even actually be less bothered by it when it's like with a funder, like, oh, they're so busy, I'm so grateful that they're spending this time with me or whatever, right? And so it's the framework is also to help people understand, like, why do I feel this way in this case and this way in this case? And it's just to look at like, well, what is it about giving and getting? Is it about the power dynamics? And it's really important to kind of listen to what we feel, because that will tell us something versus what you think you should do. It's like, it's not that big of a deal, but it is. It is, even if I don't say it. So, and also, Nick, one other thing is, it's one thing, the one layer is to say, okay, this is what matters to me. I know this because I get irritated. The deeper layer, and this is the part that I really try to encourage people to think about, is why? Is that because your parents modeled that for you? Is it or were you actually like a chronic multitasker, and then you got this like big lesson of like, oh, I can't do that. There's all these stories behind why, and people will remember your stories. They're not going to necessarily remember, oh, Nick wants this and this. They'll remember, though, if you explain why.
Yeah, that's really good. And that's, part of growing as a leader is really digging into understanding yourself in these areas, so that not only it can make sense to you, but you can then start vocalizing it to your team and, the people that work around you. How about the second one that's maybe a bit...
The other one that's really, that can get really tricky is what we call consideration. And so when we ask people, what do you think about respect? A lot of people brought up this word consideration. And so the way we define consideration is when someone anticipates how other people want to be treated, and they interact with them based on that. And so it's that going back to the surprise, like, I want to surprise them. I don't want to ask them. I want to surprise them. Or like, they look like they're really busy, so I'm not going to ask for help here. I'm not going to do this. I'm not going to put them on that team. So here's a common workplace one. Someone goes away for family leave and they come back and they're still super overwhelmed, right? And then their boss is just like, oh, who am I going to put on this project? Well, this person is super overwhelmed. Even though I know they'd like it, they're super overwhelmed. I'm not going to put them on that project. And so consideration, if you show it, it's like, that's what it is. Like, oh, I'm thinking about their family situation and how overwhelmed they are. And the lack of consideration is like, I'm going to ask you anyway. Because it's up to you to decide. And then if you think about the receiver, one person may say, oh, I'm so glad that I'm not on that, because even though I like the work, I'm just like so overwhelmed right now. Another person who has the exact same experience could say, I can't believe I didn't get asked. Right. I want to be asked no matter what. Right. And so that's how it also shows that it's relative, and it can be really tricky because there are these different things that can change it. There's not like this fixed rule. So.
Yeah. Interesting. Any questions from anyone? Feel free to, unmute yourself and say hi, or write in the chat there. Steve mentioned gets irritated when people in his classes are on their phones. I wonder why they bother showing up just to be on their phone doing other things. And yes, Steve, if you have any context on that, feel free to chat. But yeah, I think that the thing is, like, we don't know, right? You don't know if they're researching something that you're talking about. But Steve, hey, feel free to jump in.
Right. We teach on the military installations of transition, part of the transition program, a Boots to Business, high-level introduction to entrepreneurship class. And soldiers, sailors, whatever base you're on, those folks will show up. And you're right. You don't know if they're back there doing research. And then these folks are transitioning out of the military that might be getting that phone call or a message about that prospective job out there. So there's that balance. But you sometimes get those that they're just constantly looking down at the phone. They never look up. And you have to wonder what's going on. And there's not much you can do about it other than just accept it.
Julie, would you have any thoughts, or is it just accepting it?
No, I mean, I think Ashley so I did a team workshop yesterday with 20 people, and a lot of it was breakout groups and listening. And so I said, hey, for this session, attention is going to be really important. That is a form of respect we're going to practice today. And if whatever reason you feel like you can't do that, I need you to explain it. So say like, hey, it's in my culture to interrupt, because it's like, I'm really enthusiastic, or I'm going to be writing and taking notes, or I'm going to be to explain it, because otherwise we've said that this is a form of respect we expect in this session right now, because this is about deep listening to one another. And so I think it actually helps just to be explicit about it, because otherwise people are wondering, like, are they doing extra research? Or are they kind of just doing social media? And I don't know. So I see Gary's hand is up.
Yeah, Gary Malcolm, what's going on?
Hola, as I mentioned, I'm on a walk. I love this, Julie. So there, you get your acknowledgement. And then really quick, multitasking, complete myth. You can't multitask. You can only task switch. All right, so now you know that I am an absolute geek when it comes to communication, right? I feel like everything lives inside of that. And what I loved about about your 7 respects is, like, there's punctuality, which is not necessarily a direct communication, right? So I'm like, how does that factor in? And then the second is procedure. So I'm really curious, like, it's easy for me to see how communication lives inside of each of those other ones. Do you see communication living inside of those first 2, directly or indirectly? And also, just want to hear your thoughts on it.
Yeah, so I think such a great clarifying question. I think any action communicates something. So with punctuality, we think about it in terms of time constraints. So it could be, hey, we've got 5 minutes left on this meeting, and some people could be like, I don't like that you remind me that. I feel rushed. And others are like, oh, thank you so much for respecting my time, right? And then with procedure, that one is about following the rules and the established norms. So for example, someone organized a meeting and they're like, hey, here's the prep work. And some people, they might feel really disrespected if other people didn't do the prep work. Mm-hmm. And other people might be like, oh yeah, everyone's really busy. That's just like an FYI. I don't expect you to do the prep work. Right. And then like for me, I actually care more about getting it than getting it. So I'm like, yeah, well, this is going to happen. And of course, it kind of depends on the power dynamics and stuff. But like for me, I actually, if someone sent me prep work, I actually do want to do the prep work to show that, hey, I paid attention.
Yeah.
Because think about how many times you're like, they didn't read my instructions and now I have to like tell them again. And other people are like, not a big deal. In fact, like, go figure it out. Like, I don't want to have to tell you. And I want to share one story behind this, because it goes to the stories. So in one of our workshops, someone realized, like, oh, when I give out detailed instructions and I want people to follow it, I realize that people think I'm micromanaging. And then we ask why. And she was just, well, because she realized growing up, her parents, she was constantly translating for her parents because they had limited English. And so it was really important that they followed the instructions. Otherwise, there were consequences. and she applied them to work, right? And she didn't know that. And this is like my work is increase self-awareness, build relationships, and communicate clearly. Like all of my work at CuriosityBased is about that. And that first part of self-awareness is getting curious about yourself. And in this case, it's getting curious about why I care about the forms of respect I do. How have I come to believe this? So.
Oh, so interesting. Well, we have, Nicole has asked a question, and Nicole, if you feel you want to give a little more context, feel free to jump in the conversation. Mentioned coming from a CEO perspective, do you have strategies for how to bridge a wide gap in the PPICA expectations on a founding team? So Nicole, if you want to give some more context, feel free.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Hi guys. Sorry, I'm having some video problems right now, but so my essential question is there a point at which, as a leader, given that you're working with people who have very different expectations for these things, for how to both show and give respect, is there a point at which you think it's better to allow self-knowledge to drive that perspective, or at a point at which you should sort of try to separate parties? Because obviously, there's a law of diminishing returns for both of those actions over time.
So I think for there's the 7 forms of respect. There's the individual preference, there's the interpersonal, and then there's the team/organizational. And once you get to team/organizational, I think what's really important is to depersonalize what people like, because you will never be able to please everyone. And you go like, okay, what's the nature of our work? Considering the nature of our work, what are the forms of respect that are going to support that? And so, because you're going to exhaust yourself if you try to do all 7, right? And it might not even be applicable. So it's more of just like, okay, we are in we're in a place where we are building something right now. We don't know what we're building, and candor is going to be super important. Getting that feedback as we go along is going to be super important. And what that means is maybe even the leader doesn't like candor, but they're like, you know what? I'm going to need to do this for the team. And there could be some people on the team who are like, they don't like it, but they're like, you know what? This is what's going to support our work right now. And it could also be like a stage, like this is what we need to do for the next 5 months. This is what the form of respect we're going to have to prioritize with one another. Like another one I personally don't like is information. Information is you CC people on emails where they don't necessarily need to be on. You give them access to all of the files, things like that. I am actually very much of a need to know basis. I only want you to send me information on need to know basis. I only want to share information on a need to know basis. And yet there are other people who are like, no, I just want to know. I feel like, and they actually feel that something's being hidden, right? Whereas like the other person's like, I just don't want to waste your time filling your inbox. And so you could say like, at this point, information is going to be something that we're just going to practice. And it's something I actually have to practice, even though I don't like it, because my team needs it. So there are times where we just have to adjust to accommodate what the kind of the greater good. And so that depersonalizes it from the leader, because normally what people are doing is they're watching the leader and they're seeing like, what does the leader do? Not what the leader says, it's what the leader does.
Yeah. And, so great question, Nicole. And I my thought here, and Gary has his hand up, so we'll get him next. But like Founders Live, we've created, when it really got going, I put in place, because I was really the only one around at the time, core values. And, our core values are very important. And these are things that we state, and it's just a really fundamental aspect of the company. But it feels like, I don't know, I sense the movement forward here is like, as a team, you establish, as you grow as a company, really establishing these forms of respect. Like, just like you have core values, you look around and say, and I think what you were mentioning was, it's not like, so the company needs to kind of come to an agreement of like, what is important from these, how are we approaching these forms of respect? Like, it's not the founder or the CEO or the COO's personality. It should actually be, here's what the company how we approach this from a company standpoint. So now all employees know how to operate with these forms of respect. Is that kind of where you see things going?
Yeah, I think well, I guess my question was more to how do you get people into that space to be able to have that conversation? Because obviously I, as an outside party, am able to sort of see, I mean, that acronym is very applicable to these people and how they do not mesh very well on how they kind of fit with those 5 aspects. And so like, it's more of the, how do you get people to have that self-knowledge? Maybe part of that is the core questions or like the core values, and maybe sitting them down and talking about that is a good idea.
You know, and I'm not a fan of, I prefer using the word priorities over values. And the reason why is because values are just like, they never change.
Yeah, they're
and
personal.
yet, and like, especially in a startup, like priorities are actually like things shift.
Yeah.
Our priorities are going to shift, right? And we have to acknowledge that. And at the same time, it's like, how do we don't go into this thing where we're constantly just justifying what we want to do, right? I think that's like the other end of that, using our priorities to do that. So it's there with this framework. I hope it also helps people recognize, okay, these are the things that I can shift on, and these are the things that are just not going to work for me. This is behavior or certain actions here, like that are just not going to work, because it kind of just like, because there's the golden rule, and then there's the platinum rule, and there's what I call the rubber band rule. Right. And so the rubber band rule actually reflects how we think of how we actually exercise and practice respect, which is we are willing to stretch and accommodate. We are actually pretty elastic, but there are some things where it's like, no. I mean, I think, Nick, if you were in a company where everyone multitasked all the time, you would probably snap. You'd be like, no, this is not going to happen. I'm not going to do this.
Much more difficult for sure.
But over time, you'd be like, no, I'm fed up. I cannot stretch anymore. And
right.
So it's also kind of helping those members on your team, Nicole, understand, well, what are their breaking points? And is this going to not be an alignment? Because I mean, I hope with this, people talk about like culture fit, and they use these like big, vague words. And I think it comes down to behaviors.
Yeah.
It's just like, are these behaviors in alignment with my behaviors? And like literally describing the behaviors. So, yeah.
Yeah. I want to bring Gary back in for another thought. He's got his hand up again.
I do. Nicole, thank you for bringing in the other wheelhouse leadership. I love it. And that's like, I worked for a CEO for about 4 or 5 years that was late every meeting, every time. And I'm not talking a little late, like half an hour late, an hour late, like all the time. And it just got me thinking about all these forms of respect, and just your opinion, Julie, like as a leader. So if I'm Nick Hughes, the founder of Founders Live and the CEO and the leader, would it be very important to have all 7 of those as a leader working all the time, just in case? Or is it like, hey, no. I clarify this is what's important to me as the CEO, and then I go for it?
I think it's actually what's important to the team and what's important to the org. So it's not, because I mean, there are going to be some leaders who are like, no, it's about me, right? And we know what happened, like, right? I mean, that is a leadership style, right? And so there could be some who just use it like, hey, I want you to know that I want to get punctuality, but I'm not going to give it to you. Because I wonder, Gary, with that one, if that person did it to their funders and their customers, or were they perpetually late to every meeting?
Everything all the time, not just me. Yeah.
Oh, so for even those who had more power than them, they would still be.
Absolutely. Yeah. Even.
Okay. Well, so that's just like, well, that's good to know. So, because like sometimes people are selective, and other times it's like, no, I'm just, and then that kind of tells me like, they just have a different concept of time. So, but kind of going back to the leadership is if you can depersonalize it and say what is needed for the team and for the work, then, and that we're all kind of making little sacrifices and compromises of what we personally like. I think that's actually easier than trying to adjust to, okay, Nick likes this, and Nicole likes this, and Gary likes this. And then it's just like, oh my gosh, that's exhausting.
Yeah.
And then what about me? Like, I don't like it. So then what happens then? I think a really good kind of, hey, this is what we are doing together for this is actually a really good third way, like that impartial.
Yeah. Thanks for the comment and question, Gary. But yeah, that's kind of what I was going towards too, which is like the company, by depersonalizing it as the leader to really, look at the team. And, this probably should be formed fairly early in the organization. And when you're founding the company, you have an early team that comes together. Putting these in place, at least it's kind of like, this is our language, this is our love language in a way. This is our team.
Forms of respect. One day people are going to talk about it. Forms of respect. These are our forms of respect.
And I think that's great, and so which leads me to actually a really cool question. Where do you see this going for, obviously you've now put out the book, you have, you have your company, but you also have really this framework that has its own brand in a sense. Where do you want to see all this go, with taking this to further levels of organizations and all that stuff?
Yes. I mean, I dream that one day people will say, hey, what are our company's forms of respect? This is what we prioritize. This is what we don't prioritize. And to even have those conversations as a way of like, hey, I know you and I may care about different things. So let's talk about it versus trying to guess or so that's like big. I would love to have that kind of impact. Right now it's starting with the workplace. People have been asking me, when are you doing a personal version? It's like, that will be the next book. And because even in our workshops, people are just like, I'm applying this to my home life. And you think about it, the forms of respect that you care about at home could be different than the forms of respect you care about at work. So I guess where I ultimately want to go is to help people communicate better, more clearly. And then there's the book. We also do workshops with teams. So there's ones where it's just, hey, let's introduce you to the concept. And then there's ones where we work with teams where it's just, let me help you figure out what your forms of respect on this team should be. Let's talk about what the existing ones are and then what they should be. And actually, there are these exercises in the book too, so people can do it yourself as well. And we are launching a new digital course that will come out on June 20th. And that one, because I always think about different learning styles. Some people like to read, some people like videos, right? And so then that's just a self-paced course where people can watch me explain things and have a workbook. So yes, there's the expansion of this work for organizations, and then there is the moving, getting to the personal one. And then, I mean, ultimately, I want to do it in other languages.
Yeah. I like that. Yeah. How, I got to figure out the way to ask this question, but how would you imagine anything shift if you did it in different languages and different cultures, or is this like, you could drop this in any country, in any culture, and you feel like it'll be, it's agile enough to be able to be taken into those communities and cultures?
I don't know yet.
You'll find out.
I don't. Yes, we'll find out. I don't know yet. That's still a few years away. There could be something. I suspect that the forms are the same and the way that we feel about them are different. So for example, punctuality might be a lot less prioritized in other countries. Because I think what's interesting is when I bring up the different forms, people get very passionate about the form that is important to them, right? And it's like, no, that is the way. And it's just like, actually, tell me why you think that is. Like, what's the story behind that, right? And that's, I suspect that it's going to be different in different countries. Like maybe it's the whatever the majority opinion is could be different, and there'll be different stories.
Yeah, so interesting. Excuse me. Only a few minutes left, everyone. So if you have a lasting thought or question, yeah, Carlos, sounds like you got a question.
It makes a lot of sense. Yeah, I come from a different culture, of course. On the one hand, looking back, I worked for large companies and startups, and I've experienced all kinds of disrespectfulness. And I've also experienced, the good managers, how they're being very respectful. And I think it comes in a kind of a skill, right? There are just people who are sensitive to other people. And I would consider myself not the sensitive type. I could come out as being insensitive, although I want to care, I want to respect. I cannot possibly acquire all those signals that's coming into me, telling me, hey, that's not how I want to be respected. It gets to be really complex. And in my daily life, I think that's going to be the thing is I will find it very difficult to adjust to everyone.
It's so difficult to adjust. And that's why that's not the expectation for 7 forms of respect. That the purpose is to spark a conversation and to learn. So that way you're not like, it's not like memorizing all of these things. It's actually because you're not trying to guess. You're just, hey, let's have a conversation. And it is, we have structures of helping people observe things like, what is this? And even when people take the assessment, they're like, oh, I didn't even notice those things. So it helps people notice things.
It's so interesting. And, with what Carlos is mentioning is like, or how would you handle, as he said, he senses, at least, Carlos, you sense that you're not as sensitive, right? But he mentioned,
I know, yeah,
not as sensitive. Julie, any advice on that? Where if some people are more sensitive and they kind of, maybe if you call it an empath or whatnot, there's that, and then there's the opposite. Any?
I am a big believer in that we can all learn. This is all about communication. We can all and it's just having having some tools to have that conversation. Because Carlos, what you said was, I want to get better at this. I want to, and that's more important. That's way more important. There are people who don't care about, they're just like, I have nothing to learn. I'm great all the time. And the fact that you have the sensitivity to say like, hey, there's still stuff for me to learn. That's the most important part. Actually, I think that's way more important than actually being an empath or we all start at different places and we can all learn.
I guess for people right next to me, I have a team, a 7-member team right now. This is a very small team, right? With them, I can, I know this guy, he doesn't want to deal with details. So I could be general with him. This guy here, he wants all the details at some point, and he wants to get the details at some point, and I'm going to give it to him. But once, you're dealing with a large number of people, I think it just becomes a blur, right? I'm going to deal with them the way I know works, and it may not work all the time for each of those people, but I guess because there's so many of them, I'm just going to deal with them in one way.
Well, and that kind of that the leading in that one particular way, I hope it comes back to which is the way that actually supports the work, which is the way that supports that, like that, the ultimate goal. And then in having them understand, oh, it's not personal. It's not because Carlos doesn't want to do this for me. It's because now the company's grown to this size and we all have this shared expectation of this is how we're going to interact with one another.
Yeah. On that topic, our team, Founders Live is actually in the moment going through a very, very interesting maturing process and adding new team members, and there's an absolute transition happening. And so I sense myself a little bit like, oh, okay, there's some new stuff and new teammates, and that adds a dynamic. And so it's all healthy and it's all good, but I'm seeing it like literally in currently.
Mm-hmm.
And it's actually a perfect time to bring in these sort of thoughts and around what are the forms of respect that we want to build around. So I think this is perfect timing for us, but I hope it's perfect timing for everyone in this conversation. So Julie, it's we posted the websites in the chat. Where can people, is this where they can find more?
You can find more. You can also get the book on Amazon right now on Kindle. And so it'll be coming out in paperback very soon. And yes, here, let me put in my email address if people want to get in contact with me, they can.
Perfect. There it is.
Yes, I looking forward to continuing the conversation, and thank you so much for these great questions.
Yeah.
By the way, you're not your form of respect. It's not like astrology or, Myers-Briggs or something. It's just like we prioritize different things at different times.
Oh, so good. This has been such a great conversation for, Founders Live conversations. We hold these fairly frequently. You all will start seeing more of these, as we've developed now the Founders Live Academy, and we have these trainings. Gary has been running some. We have a teammate, Alex, that has really been doing well in running some of these. But, over time, look, Julie, our vision here is to create this ecosystem where, you might be able to bring this in and be able to facilitate some of these, your courses, trainings within the ecosystem and have that be a driver. So hopefully that works.
Yes, that'd be great. And by the way, we are going to be releasing a free mini course soon. So just go to our website and subscribe to the newsletter. Please subscribe to the newsletter and you will find out about the free mini course that's coming out. So.
Subscribe to the newsletter. It's great stuff.
That's awesome. I was just going to say the same thing, Nick. Julie, I feel like there's a Founders Live Academy product in here somewhere. Let's talk.
Yeah, let's keep talking, Gary.
All right. So thank you, everyone. With punctual respect on this, we're going to make sure that we're all respecting everyone's time for the next thing in your daily calendar. So thank you all so much. And it's been a pleasure. Hopefully we see you all again soon.